Okay, in this video, I really want to talk to you about how being hurt affects your attitude toward yourself. And that's because in order to self heal, you need to be able to have three things. You need to have compassion, openness, and curiosity toward yourself. But there are some really specific attitudes that we often learn in childhood that prevent us from having that openness, curiosity, and compassion toward ourselves. So I want to talk to you about those today. And when I talk to you about those, I want you to start thinking about the origin, where those things began, and how you're carrying forward those thought processes today. So, where did it start? Usually in childhood. And how do you keep those voices alive for yourself? So, one of the things I want you to also know is that really most of the time, these attitudes begin when we're a little kid. And little kids assume because they're being cared for by these giant, all powerful human beings that if they're not getting their needs met, it's something wrong with them because it's really too scary to think that the human being who's a giant, more powerful person than you isn't doing something right or maybe would want to hurt you. And so instead of thinking that way, little kids will say, okay, there's something wrong with me or there's something I need to do to get my needs met. So let's talk about how past hurts harm your attitude. The first one is by cultivating in you a pattern of feeling guilty for things. Feeling guilty comes from a belief that you've done something wrong. Now, I know that you can identify that there are times when you've done things wrong as a kid. If you get a chance to fix that and clean up your own messes, then you don't feel guilty. But if you weren't allowed to clean up your own messes or being blamed for something that you didn't do, then it's easy to start to feel guilt. One of the things that women often do is feel guilty about having feelings. And that usually comes from some place that's old, but we have to keep it going by maintaining some of the attitudes that were laid down at the time that the guilt was first developed in us. So that's the first one. The second is shame. A sense of shame is different from guilt because guilt is about what you've done. Shame is about what you are. So you feel shame when you believe that you are bad or wrong, that you personally are a mistake. Oftentimes, people who've survived childhood abuse will feel this sense that they're a mistake coming from the message that came from their parents or caregivers, that underlying unspoken message of anger or lack of compassion for you as a child that would make you conclude that you're not good or that you don't belong. So that could get in the way of your self healing too. The third is fear. So if you have a fearful attitude, that will show up when anything reminds you of something old. So when old feelings surface and any time in your current life that an old rule is broken. So both of those. Fear of experiencing old feelings and fear of allowing an old rule to get broken. Both will keep you from moving forward in your healing. And all of these, guilt, shame, and fear, lead to a sense of self criticism. Now, self criticism can happen as a result of being unable to put guilt, shame, and fear to rest, but also can come from being criticized as a younger person or not being helped to overcome your weaknesses. When that happens, you can develop a voice in your head that is critical. And the thing that self criticism does the most when there's fear, guilt, or shame that become part of your regular cycle, there also comes this other layer of attitude toward yourself that is connected to not having been able to figure out a better way so that you can feel better. You haven't been able to find something that's worked. And that can lead to self criticism too when you're asking, what's wrong with me? So I want you to realize that all four of those are going to get in the way of your healing. So I want you to identify them and start really recognizing when they're happening so you don't believe them right straight at face value. One of the ways I want you to think about shifting focus has to do with 2020 hindsight. So, 2020 hindsight is that thing that happens to us after an event while we're trying to work through our emotions about it. And it's normal when a trauma happens to try to figure out how we could have avoided the harm, right? So, you speak up, you say your needs, your partner lashes out at you, and then later you say, I shouldn't have said that. I should have known that that would have upset them. So that 2020 hindsight idea is judging the you of your past based on what you know now. And it isn't fair. I need you to recognize that what happened to you wasn't your fault. There's no way you could have known then what you know now. And judging your past self based on what you know today isn't fair and it doesn't help you heal. Guilt, fear, shame, and self criticism are all very non productive when it comes to self healing. So, to shift your focus away from guilt, I want you to really start differentiating between appropriate versus inappropriate guilt. And you should feel appropriate guilt. It's appropriate for you to feel guilt if you have done something intentionally to harm someone. Now, I'm not talking about if you've done something to intentionally harm someone and you were fighting for your life. That's not the same. What I'm talking about appropriate guilt is you have willfully and of your free choice done something to harm someone. You should feel guilt. That's appropriate. If what happened was an accident or not your fault, then guilt isn't appropriate and you shouldn't take responsibility for that feeling. You should recognize it as a ghost from your past. The second one is shame. And shame is often a projection from somebody who wasn't well themselves. It's a mistake, it's not a true message. So, projection is when I feel or believe something about myself, and instead of accepting that in myself, I put that on you. So, for example, let's say I'm a liar and I lie about everything. Then it's not likely that I'm going to believe anyone else when they tell me anything because I'm going to assume that they're liars because that's what I know about me. So let's say you have a parent who didn't have high self esteem or believed that they were ugly, or many times for women, having a parent who has a problem with body image, and then that parent focuses on your body and tells you that you're ugly or that you're not worthy of love because they feel bad about themselves. That's what projection is. Remember the beginning of this video when I said figure out where it started and how you're moving it forward. Shame is a real important one to look at where it began. And if you've had physical or sexual abuse, shame can come from that too, that sense of being dirty. That's not about you because you were an innocent and what happened to you wasn't your fault. So I really want you to be able to journal about that and recognize it's the origins, not the feeling that you're having right now. One of the things to understand about old feelings is they often feel like the truth, even though in your mind you know that they're not the truth logically, but they feel like the truth. And this is some of the things that I want you to tackle in this lesson. So the third is fear. And how do you shift away from fear? The first way to do that is to remember that you survived and to remember that whatever happened then is not happening to you now. Fear usually comes from old emotions that are connected to experiences that you put away for a long time. And when that feeling resurfaces, your brain is telling you that whatever happened that was scary is happening again right now. That usually isn't true. Those feelings that are stored away, when they come up, they can't hurt you the way you were originally hurt. You survived that. You are probably very different than who you were and what the situation was when that original harm happened. And you've got to remember that. So I'll be asking you to write down the differences between then and now to help you remember while you're working through this course that fear in the moment doesn't necessarily mean that it's real. And finally, I want to be able to shift away from self criticism. Self criticism really goes back to the reality that you did what you had to do so that you could get through. So many times when we feel guilt, shame, or fear, and we don't know how to break that pattern, we think that there's something wrong with us. And I'm here to tell you that what you did was the best you could do. Our mistakes are natural and normal. And I want you to really start allowing yourself, give yourself permission to make mistakes without criticizing yourself. And really, again, I would encourage you to evaluate, figure out who planted self critical voices in your head, and give yourself permission to separate from that criticism so that you can heal. So, there's some guiding principles that I want you to remember as you move forward through this course and through the journaling exercises in this week. I want you to create statements for yourself, put them on a post it on the wall in your journal, in your car. I want you to say to yourself, I choose compassion, curiosity, and openness toward myself. I want you to remember that everything you think, do, and say makes sense. It makes sense within the context of what you've been through. And for everything that you do, there is a really good reason. So be gentle on yourself. Click on the link below and get started with the writing exercises with this video.